Hello. My name is Dr. François Ricard. I am an osteopath and a PhD. I am director of the International Madrid School of Osteopathy, EOM, and president of the Scientific European Federation of Osteopaths, SEFO. Lately, much has been written about the concepts of osteopathic injury, somatic dysfunction. We are going to quickly review some concepts, from the oldest to the most modern. In 1874, AT still indicated that an osteopathic lesion is any change in tissue structures. In 1923, Downing described the concept of a major osteopathic lesion. In 1935, MacDonald, Hargrave Wilson described the concept of primary and secondary injuries. In 1947–48, Denslow discovered the concept of spinal facilitation. In 1952, Wilbur highlights the activation of the sympathetic system. From 1958 to 1979, Irwin Core described the repercussions of spinal facilitation, the role of muscle proprioceptors, and of gamma hyperactivity in vertebral osteopathic lesion. In 1960, the Academy of Applied Osteopathy coined the name, somatic dysfunction. In 1976, Michael Patterson detailed the concept of nerve sensitization in osteopathy. In 1990, Richard Van Buskirk proposed the role of nociceptors in the development of somatic dysfunction. In 1999, Gary Fryer made a summary of the current concepts of somatic dysfunction. In 2014–2016, Ricard and Turina described the role of the fascia and its mechanoreceptors in the mechanisms of somatic dysfunction. In 2015, Totsi proposed a neurofasciogenic model. In the core model, trauma or false movement occurs, causing an abrupt shortening of the muscle and of the annulospiral receptors. The annulospiral receptors receive signals from the central nervous system in order to discharge again in the shortened position. When the vertebral segment returns to its normal position, a gamma hyperactivity is produced due to the hyperactivity of the annulospiral receptors, go to bombard the posterior horn of the medulla with sensitive information. This bombardment of influx towards the spinal cord generates spinal facilitation, sensitization that accompanies somatic dysfunctions. Somatic dysfunction is responsible, through spinal facilitation, nervous sensitization, for repercussions on the different elements that make up the metamer. At the level of the dermatomy, reflex cellulitis is caused by irritation of the posterior paravertebral cutaneous branch, which is detected using skin rolling palpation. At the myotome level, reflex spasms with trigger points on palpation, and referred pain or, on the contrary, an inhibition of the muscles in the overlying area of reactional hypermobility, that can be detected by muscle testing. At the angiotome level, vasospasm. At the level of the sclerotomy, pain on palpation of the spinous process, or the facet of the joint. And at the level of the viscerotome, secretion disorders, and peristalsis through the orthosympathetic system. In Van Buskirk's model, the nociceptor replaces the neuromuscular spindle. Nociceptor stimulation is responsible, 1. For nociceptive reflexes in the direction of the spinal cord which activate muscle shortening. The maintenance of this shortening is responsible for a reorganization and shortening of the connective tissue. 2. For an activation of the orthosympathetic system, which causes vasomotor disorders and tissue edema. Visceral effects with changes in secretions and peristalsis. Immune effects. Freier's model is nothing more than a somewhat crude summary of the concepts that already exist around somatic dysfunctions with nothing new. Trauma to the vertebral complex, such as a minor sprain, produces 1. Facet synovitis, a fibrosis of the joint capsule, disc deterioration, and an inflammation of the periarticular tissues, responsible for a restriction of joint mobility, with changes in the texture of the tissues. 2. These elements activate the nociceptors that cause sensitization and pain, orthosympathetic activation and visceral and immune alterations, alteration of joint proprioception, reflex inhibition of the deep muscles of the spine, paravertebral reflex spasms. All of this causes changes in the texture of the tissues. The fascial model has been described by Turina and me, and later by Totsi. Somatic dysfunction is associated with fascial dysfunction. The fascial mechanoreceptors, that is, free nerve endings, Golgi, Ruffini, etc., participate in somatic dysfunction, and have an impact on spinal facilitation and nerve sensitization. In conclusion, all these concepts are complementary. They must be complemented with other mechanisms that trigger somatic dysfunctions, or associated. Disc degeneration, facet arthropathies, adhesions, pathologies of the synovial meniscus, capsulo-ligamentary sprain, reflex inhibition of multifidi in the overlying reactional hypermobility zone, periarticular fibrosis. Here we have the references of the scientific articles used in this conference. Thank you for listening.